Everyone able to hear me? Okay. I should be okay without the microphone. Just as a short introduction to what we're going to be doing here tonight, first some thank yous. Of course, thank you to Oscar for sharing your story this evening. And I'll highlight a couple of what it is about Oscar's story and the book that he's put together that is so remarkable to me, but we'll get there in just a moment. I also, of course, wanted to thank David Kirsch, wherever you are. Where are you, David, and your committee? Thank you for your devotion to this project, Allegra, in particular on this year's project. Thank you for your devotion and your hard work to make it work. And I believe I saw Sue on the Zoom. So this program and memorializing Yom HaShoah the way we do in our shul, for our shul, specifically listing those names. It's incredible how long it takes us to read through the names that just pertain to relatives of our shul. You know, it's a drop, and it's an infinitesimal drop in the entire story, but it is our story. And as it being our story, these names and every single life and human being that they represent are a little small chelek, a portion of us all. We apologize for the complexity in the Zoom and in real. It's very difficult. We have many dozens of people in the room. We have well over 100 people on Zoom, all who want to mark Yom HaShoah this year, and particularly to hear Oscar's story. You know, when I saw Oscar's book, Oscar gave me a copy. I had the opportunity to read it over the past week. There are a couple of really remarkable things that come up in this book. You know, in a few years from now, our grandkids, our kids are going to be really sick of hearing about the year and a half or whatever it was that we were wearing masks all day. We're going to talk about it. We're going to say how crazy it was. We couldn't leave the house and it was terrible. And they're going to be sick of hearing these stories. And we can imagine, and we see it already occurring, that somehow, after decades, only decades, Yom HaShoah programs around the country, Yom HaShoah programs in schools, Yom HaShoah programs generally have petered out. Somehow people are not willing to hear the stories. They're not interested. They think they heard it all. And it might have something to do with the difficulty in connecting personally. I might not know anybody who went through the Shoah. It's not my grandparents' story. I don't have to show up because my grandparents are making me show up. These are the challenges that our generation faces. How to articulate the importance of the Shoah, not just as an isolated moment in history, but perhaps the most devastating moment, of the most devastating moments in Jewish history. How do we memorialize that and learn from it every single year? That is our challenge. And that actually is what drew me so closely to what Oscar did here. And we'll get more into the details in a moment. Allegra is going to lead the interview. But in this book, Oscar tells two stories. And between the lines, there's a third story as well. One story, of course, is the story of his escape from Belgium with his mother. The other story is his father's story. And again, he's not with his father. And there's a lot of information that's missing. And the way Oscar discovered this information is by coming across a document, and we'll hear more about that, but also by sitting and doing the research. Research that has been accumulated over years, research that is now available online. And so really there are two ways to do Shoah. There's of course memory, there's to remember, but there's also to put in the work to research. And that can be done by someone of any age. That can be done by somebody who is one generation removed, a person who went through it themselves even, to discover the information they missed, but all the more so by those of the younger generation who need to bridge that gap, that distance. There is so much available to learn about and to figure out how it speaks to you and what we can derive from, especially as we have a much harder time finding the first-hand witnesses. And so what's beautiful about this book is that Oscar figured a lot of it out by himself. It's not all of his experiences. It's experiences he figured out, he discovered. And it's also experiences of others that he uses to very deftly put together what it must have been that his father went through, having read dozens of books in multiple languages. And to that, and putting together that story, we are incredibly indebted to Oscar, and we thank you so much for being willing to share it tonight. So without further ado, that's a spoiler alert. When the book is ultimately published, I think there's some really remarkable stories in here. If Oscar doesn't tell it by the end of the night, I will. But without further ado, Allegra.
Okay, so as Rabbi Ismach said, the amazing thing about Oscar's story is the two parallel stories. The story of Oscar escaping Belgium with his mother, aunt, newborn cousin, and sister who had cerebral palsy, and his father's decision to run in an opposite direction with his uncle. And what's amazing is it was put together on this timeline here. You can see the purple line is basically what happened to the Kranz family experience and up until 1942. And then 1942, they went different paths. So the blue line is the line of Oscar's father, and the red line is the history between 1942 and 1945 of Oscar, his mother, his sister, aunt, and cousin. So what's amazing about the story is that two very divergent things are happening to this one family at the same time. And that's the story that we want to hear from Oscar tonight. So if I can, I just want to start with a quote from Oscar's book, and I believe it's towards the end of the book, where Oscar writes, most importantly, I thank God for all the blessings he has bestowed upon me, a loving spouse, 3 wonderful children, and their fantastic spouses, 16 bright and beautiful grandchildren. I thank him for many wonderful, trustworthy friends, and so much more. My dear father could never have imagined some 77 years ago, while imprisoned in a slave labor camp in Germany or on the death march, what a legacy he would leave. My Hakarat Hatov knows no bounds. And just my own commentary, what's amazing about Oscar in telling this story is that he tells it as his mother and father's story, even though, of course, it's his own story as well. So if we could maybe just start with some of our visuals. So this first picture, so this is Oscar's grandfather, his father's father, with his family in Switzerland, in Belgium, in Spa, Belgium, in 1915. And just an overview, and then Oscar will discuss more. And then this is Oscar's father and mother, Oscar, and pictures of the family, and this is the legacy that was left from these people, a lot of them are here today. Oscar, if we could just start with memories of your father before you last saw him in 1942.
I really don't have many memories. I was 6 years old when I saw him last. One memory that I remember really imprinted in my mind was when I was 5 years old. There was a pogrom in Antwerp, the city where we lived. We lived right around the corner from the main synagogue. And our rear window overlooked the courtyard and the back of the synagogue. And on the Monday of Easter in 1941, which also coincided with Pesach, there was a march from the center of town where 200 Flemish fascists who had been shown an anti-Semitic movie marched through the Jewish neighborhoods, and they smashed all the windows of the Jewish stores. And they culminated at the synagogue, which was our shul. And I remember standing in the back and hearing glass breaking. And my father saw what was going on, and I asked him to pick me up so I could see better. I was pretty short, the window was a bit high, and he refused, and that was sort of shocking to me because he never refused me. And the only other memory I have of him is I loved riding on a tram. And on special occasions, it would take me from one end to the other end of Antwerp on the tram. That's about all I remember.
Okay. Okay, so if we could just, okay,
I'll go over the pictures and just...
I'm sorry?
You want me to explain who...
Sure, absolutely, go ahead.
Okay. So hard to believe that what happened in 20 years, this is 1915, Rosh Hashanah, my grandfather, Israel Kranz, had a hotel. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay. Had a hotel in the resort city of Spa, and there were Germans in the First World War quartered in Spa, and one day the commanding officer comes over with 4 soldiers, actually the 2 soldiers and 2 Jewish officers, and they want to spend Rosh Hashanah, which that year was 2 days Rosh Hashanah and Shabbat, and if they could spend the holiday with my grandfather. And he told my grandfather, you're responsible if they go AWOL or anything happens to them. So this is my grandfather. He's holding, in the left hand, he's holding a shofar, and the right hand is holding a Sefer Torah. My grandmother, my Aunt Rose, Uncle Jack, Uncle Irving, the 2 Jewish German soldiers, and the 2 German Jewish officers. And I was told that since it was a 3-day holiday, when Yontif or Shabbos was over, they quickly ran upstairs, the men to shave, and then they come back and put on this scenario. So this is, I think I was about a year old. This is Mom and Dad and myself. This is my father as a young man. This is the passport photo taken when I was 5 years old. You notice I was traveling as a Flemish boy, and if you notice the blonde hair, blue eyes, and the upturned nose, this is my mom when she was 43 years. The passport photo coming to America, that's my father holding my sister. And this is a triumph, my nachas. Okay, you wanna go now?
Sure. Before we move away from this picture, so this is Kasiel, Oscar's father, and this is his father. Mm-hmm. What's interesting is that your father lost his mother died when he was 7 months old.
When my father was 7 months old, his mother died of typhus. And
this is
my
your grandfather's second wife.
That's
with his children.
Correct.
And so Kasiel had a sister from that first marriage.
Right.
And both of them perished in the Holocaust.
She, her husband, and 7 children.
Her husband and 7 children. So what happened to your paternal grandfather?
So this is 1915. After the First World War, there was a severe financial depression, and my grandfather had to give up his hotel. And he came to the United States in 1921 with his second family.
Okay. All right. Okay. So now we're going to jump around a bit because, again, it's 2 parallel stories. So, Oscar, can you just tell us about this map and your father's journey that you've pieced together in parallel to yours? So, Oscar's father's journey is the green line, and Oscar's journey is the blue line.
I don't know if you can see it, but this is a map. I sort of made the lines more or less. This is Antwerp. So Mom and I, my sister, my aunt, and Regine, and her little 2-year-old boys, we left Antwerp on August 20th of August 24th. There were 3 major roundups in Antwerp. Where the Germans, and they were aided by the Antwerp police, they would come in the middle of the night, block off the streets, both ends, and then they would go from house to house and take all the Jews, put them on trucks and take them to Malin. Malin was the assembly camp where Jews were taken before they were taken by train to Auschwitz. So our group of 5 left Antwerp on the 24th of August, and we went to Brussels. We had false papers. They must have been excellent because the inspectors let us go. We then took a train from Brussels to Paris, and again, German inspectors were on the train, and again, they checked passports and let us go. My father and uncle, since the Germans would not hesitate to check if the men were circumcised, decided it was too dangerous to take a train, and they would have smugglers take them across the border into France, and we would meet in Paris in a day or two. So this is Paris. We waited in Paris for a day or two, and then we went on to cross the border. This is the city of Moulins, and that was the demarcation line. So if you see here, the black line is the demarcation line. North above is occupied, German-occupied France, and below that is non-occupied. The Germans didn't occupy it till 3 months later in November of 1942. So, do you want me to go on with my story? Or?
Yes.
Okay, so when we get to Moulins, which is the border town, and we I don't know how my mom did it, I never asked her, but remarkably, not knowing any French, she got 3 smugglers to take us across the river to unoccupied, to free France. And all 3 children were all given sleeping pills, and each smuggler carried a child. And as we were crossing, children all got sleeping pills, some sort of keep us quiet, and because there was an overhead bridge with German patrols, so we were just in the shade of the bridge, crossing in the middle of the night. So, and I kept watching my mom. I was supposed to be sleeping, but suddenly the river was not very deep. It was up to the waists of my mom and my aunt, and suddenly I see my mom bend down and down into the water, almost water reaching her mouth, and I straightened up, and I was about to cry out, and one of the other smugglers saw what was happening, and he put his hand on my mouth so that I would not cry out and have the German patrols catch us. So what it turned out to be was the women had taken off their shoes because even though it was not a very deep river, it was a riverbed and rocky, and Mom suddenly tripped on one of the pebbles and dropped her shoes. Inside the shoes she had, in the heels, she had, before leaving Antwerp, she had diamonds in both heels. And now she bent down trying to catch those shoes, which she never found, is still there. And when we finally got to the other side of the river, the smugglers left us and told us to walk straight ahead until we see lights. We got to a farmer, and a kind farmer's wife gave Mom a pair of slippers. So.
Oscar?
Yes.
First of all, sit. Do you think you can sit? I wanted to ask you a question. After reading the full story with your mom and hearing what you just said, so your mom was, it seems, well prepared to run. There were diamonds at the bottom of the shoe. There was a bag, a special bag that she had in the train. You'll read in the book, there's a special bag that she had that ended up being confiscated to make sure that she returned, and she wasn't going to return. She was going to run, and she ended up losing the bag, and in the bag was money and things that they needed. So she seemed well prepared, and all of that fell apart. Almost every turn that they made throughout your escape didn't work exactly as it was supposed to. Somehow your mom is taking you and your sister and her sister and nephew, and then after everything is done, at the end of the war, she returns, and when she comes back to Antwerp and then to Poland, figures out that her family has been killed. Mm-hmm. It's hard for me to imagine the strength that is required to survive all of those twists and turns, and it's hard to understand how you just maintain. What could you tell us about your mom? How did she do this?
Well,
What was she like?
obviously, she was an incredible woman, and at that point in the war, she decided it was just a matter of saving the children. She didn't care about herself. And then we were in Antwerp 5 or 6 years after the war, and then the war in Korea started, and even though we had applied to go to the United States, my aunt got the application, and we did not. Apparently the application was lost, and she had to reapply, and so my aunt came to the States 6 months before us.
Okay. So just, I'm sorry, if you could just continue on with your story. So then you make it through to France with the smugglers.
Okay.
And
So
tell us about this man. Is that at the point where?
not yet.
Not yet. Okay,
No.
sorry. Go ahead.
So the next town that we were heading for was the city of Lyon. Lyon is a town closest to the Swiss border, and I think my parents had decided if they would not by chance meet in Paris, that we would meet in Lyon. We get by train to Lyon, and we have no idea where to go. We knew that the hotels were too dangerous to go to, and so we get off the train and we're sitting on the sidewalk cafe in Lyon, and suddenly a total stranger turned out to be, he was also a Jewish man from Antwerp, and he recognized two women sitting on the sidewalk. He comes over and he just says to the two women, "Are you crazy, Miss Sugar? You can't sit out in the street because they're picking up people, Jews, right and left." And my mom said, "We hardly have any money left. We're afraid to go to a hotel. What to do?" He said, "First, sit in the rear of the cafe. Don't sit on the sidewalk, and I'll find you a place to stay." So it took him a long time to go back. When he finally did, he found, for my aunt, he found a hallway closet in a building where the Jews lived. At that point, French Jews with French citizenship were not bothered yet. They only were arresting foreign Jews. So the building was Jewish. They found her a closet where she was with her 2-year-old boy, and they warned her, "If you're quiet, you can stay. If the baby makes noise, you'll have to go." And this man, my mom called him Angel Number One, and for us, we found a small room in the back of a coal store. In those days, they used to heat their homes with coal, and they would get daily deliveries. And in the back of the coal store, it was a little room used, I guess, for the workers in the store. Still on? Yes? Okay. For some refreshment, the room had one table, 3 chairs, and a heater to heat up some water. And in the little backyard, and in the yard there was a little hut, which turned out to be a toilet, but actually was just a board. Actually, there was no board, there was just a hole in the ground, and if you had to use it, you had to squat. And we stayed there for almost a month, and at one point, I don't know how much time I have.
Go ahead.
Okay, so there was absolutely nothing to do, and as a 6-year-old active, I was going berserk, and Mom finally found something to occupy her with. Both my sister and I got head lice, and she was busy combing her hair with a metal comb, and she found the name of a Jewish barber where she took me and had my hair all shaved off, and then she pleaded with him if he would be kind enough to take me in for a short time because I just couldn't sit still. And the Jewish barber agreed, and I was playing in the courtyard. It was a common courtyard for all the inhabitants of that block. And soon enough, the children found out that this little boy who spoke a strange language and no French was Jewish, and they started calling me things. And then the barber took me by the hand and brought me back to the whole store. And they were a wonderful couple, and Mom kept in touch with him after the war. And every year at Rosh Hashanah, they would exchange greetings. So Mom one day goes to the railway station and to get tickets to take a train to the last town in France near the Swiss border. And she gets 5 tickets. Going to the station was the most dangerous place because the milice, which were a fascist group, and the gendarme would go hunting for Jews, and the main place where they could catch Jews was, of course, the train station where Jews were traveling, trying to get out of town. So she comes back to my aunt in her closet and says, we're leaving, shows her the tickets, we're leaving on September 21st, we're going towards Switzerland. And my aunt had memorized the Jewish calendar, and she said, September 21, there's Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and I'm not going. My mom was arguing with her, just talking theology about what? Pikuach Nefesh, right. Thank you for reading the book. So there was no convincing my aunt. Said, I'm riding here for a month, and I'm not desecrating Yom Kippur. I'm not traveling on Kol Nidre night. So my mom had no choice. She had to go back to the station and exchange the tickets with all the dangers involved, and she got tickets for us to leave a few days later. So I'll abbreviate it, but so we took the train from Lyon to a town called Tournon-les-Bains, which is the last station, and it's right on the French side of the Lake Geneva. On the train, they had again inspectors. There were some young people who jumped off the moving train, who were probably Jews, and the inspectors came, we were sitting in our compartment. They checked our passports, and they looked at us, and they let us go. We get to Tournon-les-Bains, and again, I don't know how Mom did it. She, not speaking any French, she got a smuggler to take us in his car to the Swiss border. So we all got into the car, and at one point, he stops and he says, I don't want to go any further. As you get too close to the border, there are gendarmes and milice, and you'll get caught. So I have to let you off here. And then as an afterthought, he said, don't walk on the road, walk in the forest. There's a path, actually, I think it was for horseback riders. And you'll walk and you'll go about 5 kilometers, which is about 3 miles. You'll see a light, and then you know that you're in France. And that you're in Switzerland. So the 2 women start walking. My mom is carrying my sister, her cerebral palsy, and my aunt is carrying a 2-year-old child, and my mom is holding with the free hand, just holding my hand. And they're exhausted, and at one point they sit down and just to rest before continuing. And a group of Jews comes by, also fleeing, about 20 or 25 of them, fleeing towards Switzerland. And Mom asked a few people to help us carry one of the children. No one paid attention, they just kept walking. And finally, one of the last men was a young man, and my mom exclaimed, Harry, and he recognized us, and it turned out to be that it was my mother's aunt's stepson. And my mom had given him a soccer ball for a bar mitzvah present a few years before that. And he said, there's no way you're going to make it. It's too far. Why don't you sit here? I'll go to Switzerland and I'll get help. So when I told my kids the story, they just wouldn't believe me. So twice a year, I would go visit my sister in Belgium and always take along my kids when they were teens. And I had Harry tell them the story, and him they believed. So Harry told the following story, that when he got to what looked like the border, he sees a soldier sleep and leaning against a tree. At first he thought it was a German soldier because during the Second World War, the Swiss uniforms and the helmets were very similar to the German uniforms. So he tiptoes past him, doesn't wake him, and he walks, and he comes to a small village, and the entire village has only one light on, and he knocks on the door, a window opens upstairs, and the woman yells down, said, "Vous êtes en Suisse," you're in Switzerland. And she and her husband come down, open the door, and Harry, this young man who's just 18, says, "I have family on the other side of the border, I need help, I need milk for the children." So this man he and Harry get into this small truck, and they drive to the border. And the man with the truck says, "I can't go any further," and he stops. Harry gets off, and he comes into the forest. He finds Mom, my aunt, the children, and as he described it, he was not a religious man, but as he told my children, it was like Tisha B'Av, the women sitting on the ground in the forest and crying, thinking that he would either get lost or not find them. And now when they go back to the border, the Swiss guard is awake. And he said, "The women and children can cross into Switzerland, but you," pointing to Harry, said, "you may not." In the beginning, the Swiss allowed everyone, all the people fleeing, they let everyone into the country. Later on, they would only allow men if they were with a family, but they allowed women and children. And towards the end of the war, they turned everybody back. They wouldn't allow anyone, even knowing that they would be surely killed. So the truck now drives us to a small city, and the truck stops. He says, "I can't go any further, but if you go all the way to the end of the street, there's a police station, and just go in and tell them that you just crossed the border." Of course, the Swiss police couldn't believe how deep we got into Switzerland without being detected. Of course, he didn't mention anything about the truck. The Swiss then called the army headquarters in Geneva, and they came with a truck, and the soldiers picked us up, and they put us in a hotel in Geneva.
Okay, so this is a picture of Harry, and this is your son, Noam, meeting Harry.
So
and his wife.
I have another picture taken by the Swiss police when he was 18 when we arrived. And this is when we visited, every time we visit Belgium, visit my sister, we always stop by and see Harry and his wife Fanny. And this was when Noam, in '89, when Noam was 14 years old, and I took a picture of them. So,
Okay.
Noam, you remember?
Okay. So basically going back to the parallel stories again. So this is pictures of Oscar in 1942 in Switzerland.
This is end of 40, no, this is 1944.
I'm sorry, so we'll start here, 1942. You want to tell us about this picture?
Okay, so this comes before.
This one comes. This is
No, this-
1942 and this is 1944.
Oh, correct.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Okay, so this is, we received, surprisingly, for 15 months, we did not hear from my father and uncle. We did not know what happened. They missed the rendezvous in Paris and in Lyon, and we absolutely had no idea what happened. And luckily, we had a cousin in Switzerland. It helps to have a Swiss cousin. And he received a letter in November of 1943 with the return address of Blechhammer. And this is the first letter. And I'll just quickly read it for you. My dear cousin, I have written to you several times, and I'm surprised by your silence. I'm still with my brother-in-law, and we work together. We are both in good health, and hope it's the same with you. I have heard that your Belgian cousins and their children are vacationing in Switzerland. Oscar and Rara. Rara was a nickname for my sister, Rachel, and little Charlie. Write to me as soon as possible and give us news of the children and photos. How is your business, etc. And then a few months later, we get a second letter, and this is dated the 13th of December. We didn't get it in January 44. And he says, my dears, I am happy to have received news from you all, and that all is well. My brother-in-law is still with me, and we are both in good health, and as far as work is concerned, all goes well. I am waiting the promised photographs. If you have the possibility to send me a small package with meat, butter, sardines, and chocolate, I thank you in advance. Many kisses to the children, and best greeting and kisses for all. And it's signed Jacques, which was the code name for my uncle Jacob, and Georges, which was the code name for Gassil, my father.
So just get us oriented, Oscar, about where was Belacham, where was your father at this point?
Okay, so my father, as we find out later, which I didn't really find out until about 2 years ago, or less than that, he and my uncle were both caught trying to cross the same town to get to the unoccupied zone, and they were both caught, and they were put in a prison, actually a dungeon. You have the pictures?
Yeah.
They were put in this, by the French, caught them, handed them over to the Germans, and they put them in this dungeon where they were for 25 days. This is the Mal Coiffé in Moulins. You can see the windows are covered, so there's just some light coming in, but they can't look out. And this is the door to one of the cells, so you can see they're really bolted in and make sure they can't get out. So after 25 days, they were sent to 3 different holding camps in France. First on September 24th, when they were freed from the prison, they were sent to the Camp Pithiviers. The following day, they went to Beaune-la-Rolande. The day after that, they went to Drancy. Drancy was the main assembly camp for Jews, where they almost daily trains departed with 1,000 Jews and direction of Auschwitz.
So at what point did they get to Belacham, and if you could show us approximately where Belacham is?
Okay, so they got to Belacham approximately the end of September. So they left on September 28th. They left on transport number 38, direction of Auschwitz. The train came to an unexpected stop at a town called Kossel, and everyone was ordered off the train, and everyone was then told to reboard the train, except all able-bodied men between 17 and 45 to remain. So all the people on the train went back on the train, and they went to Auschwitz, which was only about 40 or 50 miles away. So Kossel was still in Germany, and Auschwitz was in southern Poland. So they got to Belchama, which was a labor camp on the end of September 1942. Most men worked in they called it Oberschlesing Hydrierwerke. It was a huge factory with 60,000 workers from all over the world, all over Europe, and converting coal into fuel, which the Wehrmacht and the Luftwaffe, the Air Force, was badly in need of. And He was there for about 2.5 years, and then on January 21st of 1945, they left on what was called the Death March, and it was a 13-day march. They were given a half a loaf of bread and told them it would last them for 3 days, but the march took 13 days in deep, knee-deep snow, and at night they would find an empty barn and push thousands of men inside and then lock the door. No toilet facilities, nothing, just they found some straw. They could sleep on the floor and worry that one of the other prisoners would not steal their bread or...
Oscar, if I may,
sure.
Just to be clear, no detail which you happen to know incredibly precisely did you hear ever from your father. All of this came from the research that you did, finding his name in books and in logs of trains and in camps, and you pieced all of these details together about what must have happened to him for him to have survived all throughout this time.
Well, no, actually, I read about 21 books written by survivors. I have a few of them outside on the table when you go out, and also I spent some time at the library at Yale, where they have testimonies of 24 Bahamas survivors. But most of the research I did going to the Bob's Library at NYU downtown, where Wednesday was my day off, and I would go almost every Wednesday. They were very unusually friendly to me. They gave me a glass enclosed room where I could do my research. They gave me a computer. Everyone hear me? Okay.
So before we go to how you pieced together your father's story, I just to finish this story.
Until we received that letter in November of 1943, we knew nothing. For 15 months, we had absolutely no idea what happened to the men. And after the war, all we knew was from the French government. My mom got a letter saying that he was deported on September 28, 1942, from Drancy going towards Auschwitz. And the other information she got was that he died in Buchenwald. And that's all we knew. So then, for the since we didn't send pictures of the first letter, so this is a photo that at the first camp where we were at in Switzerland was above the town of Lucerne, and we were guarded by Swiss soldiers. Mom got one of the Swiss soldiers to take photo of us. So this is Mom, Regine, myself, my sister Rachel, and my cousin Charlie. This is I was 2 years with a Swiss Jewish family. The administration in the camp decided that the children should all go to school and live with Jewish families in the town of Lucerne. So I stayed with a family, Lande, and I was there for about 2 years, and then for some reason they didn't want me anymore, and they sent me to a children's home, Heide, and which before the war was a summer camp for Jewish children, and during the war they used it as a camp for Jewish children. And so we went to the local public school, and when we came home in the afternoon, we had Hebrew education. So sure enough, I got sick. I got tuberculosis, and at the time they didn't have a treatment for that. The treatment was high altitude and complete rest. So they sent me to Davos, where I spent 5 months. And one day, one of the counselors, one of the young women, girls actually, from the camp came to visit us in Davos. And this is myself. This is another boy who was with me in the same sanatorium. And this young lady, her name was Carola Siegel. And when she went to Israel after the war, she changed her name from Carola to Ruth. And when she got married, she adopted the name of Westheimer. So she became known as Ruth K. She didn't spell out Carola. Ruth K. Westheimer. Now, this is a photo.
What was her expertise?
Okay.
She hadn't gone to college yet. Okay.
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 All right. So Oscar, now if we could just move to back to your father's story, because that's a big part of your book. What you discussed with us what you knew about your father initially,
Sure.
but then what happened in 2002 that sparked your research?
Okay, do you have that short? So,
I don't. This. That?
yeah.
Okay.
So, in 2002, I remember very vividly, I'm sitting at my computer and I'm surfing the net, and I come across information that with the recently dissolved Russian government, the dissolving of the Soviet Union, I should say, they gave to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum lists that they had captured when they liberated Auschwitz in January of 1945, and they were now available at the Holocaust Museum in Washington. So I knew my father was in Blechhammer and Buchenwald, but I didn't know anybody in Auschwitz. But my grandfather and grandmother disappeared. We didn't hear from them after 1941. So I type in on my computer, I type in Stelzer, S-T-E-L-Z-E-R, Fievel, and I click, and instead of Stelzer, it comes up Kranz Kasil. I'm still flabbergasted. And when I calmed down again, I found out that you could get the information by contacting Washington, the museum. So this is what I got a few days later. And I don't know if you can see it, but it's concentration camp Auschwitz. And here is his concentration camp number. So 177681. So that was a big help because before that we had no number. And here it says Kranz Kasil, the first name, and the middle name is Israel. His middle name was Sender, but the Germans gave every male Jew the middle name of Israel. Every woman had the middle name of Sarah. And it has the address, the last address in Belgium, which is correct. Occupation is wrong. It says furrier. He was a diamond merchant. And then religion is Mosaic. Previously Polish. Jewish. The name of the parents, Israel and Rachel, born Stricker. And then he said both died. He didn't mention that his father was in the States. And beide verstorben, and here it says name of wife, and it says Frieda born Stelzer. So now I understood why typing in Stelzer, the name of Kranz popped up. And then 2 children, 6 classes, 6 years of Polish elementary school, and well, his height, hair. Actually, I misread. It says his eyes were brown, but I misread that. So in my book, I have that they were gray. So it's good to have someone proofread who also knows German.
And then after you found this,
This is his signature, which I recognize. So after I found this,
where did that lead you next?
okay, so that led me to the Spielberg collection. Is the VHA, which stands for Video Holocaust Archive. It's the University of Southern California. There are about 52,000 testimonies. 1,000, anybody, you can go home, and 1,000 are available anyone. And the other 51,000 are only available in New York, not at the public library and not Yeshiva University, only at the Columbia Library and the Pubs Library at NYU downtown. So I would spend Wednesdays, I would go and I would check at home on my computer people who were in that range of the numbers and email the library downtown, and they would have the file there when I got there on Wednesdays. And some of those testimonies are 2 hours, 4 hours, some are even 8 hours long. I would go and buy the biggest size of
Coffee.
Starbucks, and they would even allow me. They were not allowed to bring in food or drinks, but they said I could bring it in, and I never spilled a drop. And
Oscar, if I may,
yes.
Reading this account of Oscar going and using the numbers that were ultimately on people's arms to reverse engineer who they were and using those numbers to find them through the Spielberg Foundation and those videos, to me, was an incredible thing. Because the goal of the numbers was to dehumanize
Correct.
all of the people. And your odyssey took you to find those numbers to rehumanize them, to
Right.
turn them back into people.
If not for the numbers, I would not have been able to do that. Also, I came across about 21 books written in different languages, in Dutch, and French, and German, and English, and I would read their testimonies. And after a while, you got a feeling, you knew what was happening, because they all describe it, and a lot of them are very similar. And the same thing happened when they left on the death march. So I would just on the computer put in Blechhammer, and we'll get the results, and then we'll put in Blechhammer, Grossrosen, and then Grossrosen, Buchenwald, and all these names would pick up, and some of them had written books which I read, or I would then research them at the library. So.
The hour's getting late, and I wanna, if it's okay, I'd like to share my top hits from the book. I don't want anybody to not get it, but some of the things that I read here really stopped me in my tracks, and I'd like to get your comment on what these experiences may have been like. So, for example, you talk about how after you got back to Antwerp, you weren't 100% sure ultimately what happened to your father. It was not clear to you, as I think you were 11 years old at the time, what had happened. And the way somebody communicated to you that your father had died was by, when you were walking out for Yizkor, they said, "Don't leave. Your father's not alive."
Right. My mom had obviously difficulty telling me that my father died. It wasn't a sudden thing. And so for 2 years, she kept saying, you know, maybe he's still alive, maybe he's a prisoner in Russia someplace. And then I went to a small shul in the neighborhood, and I used to walk out for Yizkor. And then one day, my father had a second cousin in the shul, and on one of the Yom Tovim, he asked me to sit next to him. And then when I got up to for Yizkor, he said, "Stay, your father is dead." And that's how I found that. And then when I told Mom, she said yes, and the rabbi says, "We only have to sit Shiva for 1 hour."
How long before that had she known for sure?
I think she knew for about 2 years.
Wow. Okay, that was one. Another thing, when you come back to Antwerp, you go to school, and all the Jews in the school ask each other, you know, usually when you come back to school, the question is, what'd you do last summer? The question in that school was, where were you hidden?
Right.
Where were you hidden?
There was a
survived?
number one question everybody asked you when you came. You came to the school, says, where were you hidden? Because everyone had a story. Nobody who survived did so because they stayed home. So they were all hidden either with families in Belgium, or they had escaped like we did to Switzerland.
So the next time our kids are complaining about writing that annoying essay in the beginning of the year, what did you do last summer? This is a good Mr. Haskell.
Yeah, I mentioned in the book I had two classmates, a boy and a girl, who were both hidden in the city of Ghent, and subsequently they married. So
the hiding worked out.
I don't think they were hidden together, just that they had a common story.
Got it. Okay, so I mean, there's a ton more to discuss.
Right.
I had there was one remarkable passage, was so remarkable in the book that I actually wrote the whole thing down. I was pretty amazed by it. If it's okay, can I read? I'm just going to read an excerpt. You don't know what it is, but I'm going to read it. It's something that you wrote about yourself. And it's as follows. I am not a historian or a scholar. I am merely a curious child, eager to uncover a veiled past, so that my children and grandchildren can benefit from knowing it. I mean, I don't know if there are any final questions, but I have to say, Oscar, having heard your story, having read it in depth and detail, seeing the maps and the images, the visuals, I know that I have. So I thank you for all of your participation in this program and expressing this with you. I have one final question that I know came up when Allegra and I were discussing. Do you consider yourself, this is a big question, I know my dad dealt with it also, do you consider yourself a survivor?
I never did, but someone told me recently that if you were there during the war, that you're a survivor. I thought people who were in the concentration camps are survivors, but I guess I qualify. By the way,
so being smuggled through water, living in closets, not having food to eat, that doesn't do it for you.
A little tuberculosis.
A little tuberculosis.
By the way, this Jewish star is what every Jew above the age of 6 had to wear. I don't know if this is mine or my mom's, but the night before leaving Antwerp with our false papers, my parents played a game. They had me finding the Afikoman. They said, find any Jewish star. So I went through all my clothes, and every time I found the yellow star on one of my sweaters, I would get a present. And also, my parents trained me my new Flemish name to the point where they would wake me in the middle of the night. What's your name? What's your name? And when we crossed the border, she would squeeze my hand hard, and I knew it was just, if they ask you, remember your new name.
Do you remember being afraid as a child? Did you know enough to be afraid, or were you just afraid because your mom told you to be, and she was nervous?
Well, the 2 episodes where I was really afraid was when I saw Mom go down in the water, and I thought she was going to drown. And the other time was when we crossed the border, everyone coming on the train from going towards Lyon, when we crossed, just before we crossed the demarcation line separating northern occupied France from southern non-occupied France, everyone had to get off the train. There was a large, you have that picture? You have the picture of the demarcation line?
No, I don't have it. No.
Okay, so there was a huge road. There were 3 officers to the right, 3 to the left, and I was, quote, a wild child. And so my mom took me by the hand, and we crossed on the left-hand side, whereas my aunt took her 2-year-old and my sister in a carriage. She crossed without being stopped. And when we came to the first officer, he stopped. He looks at my mom, he looks at me, he looks at the papers, and then he asks her in German, YIGN? And my mom, who spoke fluent German, answered in Flemish, no, yeah. And again, he repeated, he looks at the papers, he looks at me, he looks at her, and then finally he said, and Mom is squeezing my hand the whole time, in case he asks you for your name. And then just shortly, because I spoke about this exactly 15 years ago on Yom HaShoah in 2006, so as we keep walking, the second officer stops us and says, wait. He calls for the first one, and in German it says, Warum lassen Sie die Juden mit das Kind gehen? Why did you let the Jews and the child go? And the first one yells back, lassen Sie gehen, wir fangen sie doch schon alle. Let them go, we'll catch them all anyway. And then, what you alluded to the bag, there was a third officer, and he said to my mom, are you meeting anyone? And innocently she says, yes, I'm meeting my sister. So he says, leave your bag here, and come back with your sister and you can have it back. So the bag had all you need for a trip, clothes, change of clothes, some food, and had a secret compartment on the bottom that had dollars and some diamonds. So Mom thought that she was being followed and she was ready to go back, and my aunt grabbed her hand and said, no, you're not going back. And so we started going back towards the train, and then suddenly my mom says, no, we can't go back to the train because they'll come looking for the woman who didn't come back for her bag. So she went the opposite direction, and again, like I said, in Paternal, she managed to find those 3 French smugglers. I don't know how she communicated with them, but they carried the children across, and that's...
All right, thank you so much, Oscar, and on behalf of everyone here, thank you for what you've remembered. And thank you for what you've brought to light with your research. Yasher koach to you, and please, once again. For those who are on Zoom, for those who are present, we have a video camera who's doing a menschlich job, I hope, of recording all of this, and will be distributed tomorrow. Next.
Excuse me. Outside are books that I used in consultation, not all the books, and some of them I even wrote the number. So my father's number was 177, so all around 176,000, 178. And there are also 2 books that I consulted, one that has the list of all the prisoners who were annexed to Auschwitz on April 1st, 1944, and as well as about 150 women. And the other book is a book by Serge Klausfeld, where he has every convoy leaving from France to Auschwitz, has the names of all the passengers, the number of men, what nationality. The convoy my father and uncle were on were mostly Romanian Jews who had escaped to France. So if you want to have a look at them, both those 2 books are open on the page where you can find the information. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'll take the information.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.